Okay, so that's the recording started. As ever, these will be available on YouTube when I can upload them sometime this week. Okay, so you've seen some videos there on COBIT and ITIL, which are the two prevalent standards for IT-related processes. And I think you saw some differences, but also some similarities, because these things are about people, about the processes that they carry out, about the fact that they can be reproduced. So there are processes that are going on that are properly detailed, which means, of course, that they are auditable. So people can come back and check, has this been done? And we talked a lot about that when we're talking about governance. People have to be sure that they're doing the right thing. So part of that is having records. Hence the auditable part, hence the having things that are detailed and can be assigned to people, and the processes are all there. Because all that exists, it's easy to go back and see what happened. Either to show that things are going the way you would expect them to, and that you have a full set of records to do that. Or if something goes wrong, to at least be able to say, well, yep, it went wrong. Things do go wrong. That's not, sadly, impossible. But we did our best. We put in all these processes. We explained to people what should happen. If someone falls off a ladder, that's a tragedy. But it may not be anyone's fault. But it is your fault if you haven't explained to people about the health and safety of using a ladder, if you haven't properly maintained a ladder, if you didn't have somebody at the bottom of the ladder holding it. And even if those things didn't happen, if you have records that show, look, this person got training on a ladder, they were told explicitly not to go up a ladder without having somebody there, then it shows that as an organisation, you're doing things in the right way. And as I said at the start, these things tend to be stored on a computer, which is why we get involved. Although, of course, a lot of the things that we're looking at in terms of governance, in terms of risk, particularly for things like cybersecurity, are clearly within our domain as well. And you heard in the video some chat about risk as well. So all of these things are bound together. So we keep coming across these same themes over and over. The governance, the risk, the auditing, all of that stuff appears over and over again because it's what organizations want and need to do. All of these things are just the processes that we put in place to ensure that they are done. And I've said before that if you can show that things are done, if you can show that you're using the correct standards, then that helps a lot if something does go wrong. So if somebody walks in and goes, so what kind of records were you keeping? Oh yeah, well I kept a ring binder and I wrote everything down. Oh, good. I mean, that is a good thing to do. But what was the standard for writing things down? Was it as and when you remembered? Is it specific things? But if you can point to standards, if you can point to ISO 31000 for the risk standard, if you can say that you're recording things based on ITIL standards or COBIT standards, if you can say, look, we're following all of these industry standards, then it makes it an awful lot easier for people to give you the benefit of the doubt. So with that in mind, let's talk about a couple of them. And as I said before, we are going to cover them, but we're covering them very much at the surface level. There's an awful lot in these. I'm really just making you aware of them, but to actually cover them in detail is a long course. And I said earlier, covering something like ITIL would be a course as long as the one that you're currently taking. So I'm looking at them very superficially. It's just to let you know that they are there, to ensure that you understand that these things exist and that they are a good thing to have. But I'm not going to pretend that you'll suddenly be an expert on COBIT or ITIL when we're done with these. So with that said, let's first talk about COBIT, unless anyone has any questions before we move on. Okay, COBIT came first of all from the USA. I mean, it's spread beyond there now, but it was very much a US based practice set of rules and regulations from the US. It came, like many of these things, from previous standards that had been set up, in this particular case something called ISACA, the Information Systems Audit and Control Association. When we talk about ITIL, we'll see the same sort of thing. It actually came from a UK government based initiative, but it's actually now been taken over by an organisation of its own. The whole point, though, is to try to understand IT within the business. And we've talked about this before. We love IT, we're IT people. We'd do IT even if it didn't help the business at all, because we like the stuff. But the organisation that's paying our salaries, the organisation that's buying the hardware, the organisation that's buying the software, that organisation needs to be sure that what we are doing links directly to business goals. So the idea is to link those, to understand what the business needs to do, to understand what IT can bring to that, and how those things can be linked up. And that, of course, is where people like you come in. People who understand the IT, clearly, that's your background, but also people who understand the business side. People that appreciate that the business side is a thing and that IT doesn't exist in its own silo, or it certainly shouldn't. So we can use COBIT to try and understand how IT and the business relate and how we can ensure that IT serves the business. And it does this by splitting up into different areas. If something new comes out, you know, I don't know, Apple introduced the new 15-inch iPad Pro. Now, immediately I'm drilling and want a new iPad Pro. But is there a business case for that? Where's the plan for using that in the business? So the first step isn't, oh, shiny new hardware, acquire, and then figure out how to use. First step is plan what the business needs. Only after you've done that do you acquire what you need and implement it. So it starts off with a business need, understanding what that is, and then trying to figure out whether we can find things that will support that. And only once we have do we get the tools that we need, whether those are hardware or software. But of course, the story doesn't stop there, because once the stuff is out, it needs to actually be put into use and supported after that. There's no point chucking IT hardware or software at end users and going, see you later, guys. Instead, it needs to be properly implemented. People need proper training, and it needs proper support after that. And then once it's in, you have to figure out whether you did a good job or not. Did you figure out the right business need? Did you choose the right thing to fulfill that business need? Did you implement it in the right way? Have your staff been properly supported? In other words, you monitor and evaluate. Sounds very much like plan, do, check, act. So all of these threads all come in and are seen again in all these different things because they're trying to do the same sort of thing. Not surprisingly, they're all trying to do the best for the business. And we'll see it, we haven't done ITIL yet, but we'll see them come up again with ITIL. Now that's a very high level way of looking at it. It's a lot more involved on the ground. It's detailed. And there are 34 processes that COBIT looks at to ensure that all of this happens. And you might think, 34, you're kidding me on. Or you might think, 34, that's really handy, because that means that probably they've thought of everything. And all I have to do is follow these steps and I will be fine. And there's a bit of both in that. Yes, you probably will. But don't forget to think along the way. Don't just do it as, I have followed COBIT, I am okay. Think about it. Understand the business, understand the business processes, understand the people involved, understand what you're doing, and use those to properly understand what you're doing. What does it do? It means that you have a better chance of following the regulations and the legislation that we all have to live with. So as I said, it might be something about storing health and safety information. It might be something about how long you store data. Does anyone know how long you should store data?
I know that for a lot of the health and safety stuff and that, I think is it 3 or 6 years you need to keep a hold of it?
It's not a specific time, it's however long is necessary to keep that data. It's however long they consider necessary, but they have to explain why they consider it necessary for that time.
So that's a good answer. There's different times because different applications assume different outcomes. So for example, if you are involved in government, you have to keep all your emails for 7 years. 7 being a normal term plus some more if you need to check back. If you're involved in banking, you need to keep all the information for, and I'm going to get this wrong, I'm going to say 21 years, but somebody can check that for me. So that you can go back and check all the audit trail for all the financial information. So there's no one thing, this is how you save data. It will depend on your application. But one of the things that COBIT does is says, okay, go check what you need to do for this. What is it you need to do for this? Now write that into your process so that things are for this correct amount of time. So it's about reminding you that you have to think about the stuff. It's not saying you will always store it for 5 years, full stop. It's about reminding you that there are limits, that you have to do this stuff and you have to build in that storage. And that works both ways. You might think, well, that's all right, paying, storing data for ages, and I won't get into whether it is or not. But what I will say is some organisations don't think about it at all. So what they do instead is just store everything. Everything that goes through the system, they just say, nah, keeping it forever. And I suppose the pretty obvious question there is, why? Why would you put resources towards preserving everything? So again, it's about thinking what needs to be preserved and what doesn't. And of course, if you're not storing things, there's less time involved in backing them up, less money involved, fewer processes that have to be carried out. So that means that all of those things that you're freeing up can be used in other stuff, things that will actually benefit the business. So it's not just about putting on burdens, it's also about trying to understand where you can do other things. And that, of course, saves the business money. So COBIT tries to look at it in different ways. And the first one is frameworks. The idea is you look at what's going on. You look at how they fit in to the business, what's happening in terms of, taking an order, transferring money, sending an email. What are all these things? Where do they fit into the businesses? And they're clearly not the same types of thing. So how do they fit into the business? And how do they fit into any legislative frameworks, any governance issues, any risk issues? Then once you've identified them all, you can start to describe them. And writing things down is a really good way of trying to understand whether you do understand them or not. Because if you can't write them down, perhaps you don't understand them as well as you thought you did. It also means there's one central point that everyone can go to and say, yeah, this is what we do. We have all agreed this now. You don't have two different departments fighting, saying, well, I thought we did this and I thought we did that. Well, no, it's there. This is our process. This is what we do. If you want to change it, we can have that conversation, but right at the moment, this is the process. And once you have those, you can start to decide whether or not you're doing them well. Are we doing this in the best way, the most efficient way, the cheapest way? You decide your metric that you want to use. So again, we're going back to this PDCA thing about trying to get better all the time. And of course, you can't actually get better if you don't know what you're doing in the first place. So it's a key part of that. Also, a key part of that is how you decide whether you're doing well. So as I say, you can decide on your metric. What are your controls? What are your ways of deciding how well you've done? If we've decided what our processes are, if we've decided what we're doing, if we know what our approach is to what the business is doing, that also helps in terms of any management issues. If we know what the process is, we know who should be running it. We know who's responsible for ensuring that it happens. And think back to the risk lectures that we did. One of the documents you saw very clearly said, this is a risk and this is the person that's managing it. It may not be the person that does it, but they're the responsible person. This is who we phone up and say, is this working or not? So we can assign that responsibility to a person. And again, if we know what the process is, we know what the controls are, we know what we're trying to get to, we can actually see what the objective is. It's all very well saying, we will get better in responding to customers. But what does that mean? Maybe the objective is we will respond to customers within 2 weeks. or 2 days, or 2 hours, or 2 minutes. And they might be different depending on what your business is, what the customer is getting in contact about, the method they use to contact you. A 2-week response if you're running a call centre is probably not correct. But then again, now there's 2 minutes. So if you understand what it is you're doing, if you understand what you want to get to, then you can measure it and try to understand what you need. And that really helps, because if you can say, we want to answer all calls within 30 seconds, and you're not doing that, then you can start to understand why that's not happening. Now, it could be something as basic as we don't have enough phone lines. We don't have enough people answering those phones. But it could also be our phones are jammed because of this new product that somebody's brought out and doesn't work. So you can link that back to other areas of the business to start saying, look, we're being compromised because this is compromised. Maybe you could do something about that, and that would help us. So it's not just about, oh, we do not answer the phone, we need more people to answer phones. It's about trying to understand what's going on as well. So that brings us back once again to the business, the organization. What are the issues around all of this? And as things move on, as the organization matures and settles into a rhythm, we can start to see if there's anything we're missing. Originally, we might not actually even allow people to phone us. Or if we do, it might be that they just get through to reception and get added on to somebody. We might need a dedicated call line because we're selling more, because we have more products, because whatever. The point is, there may be gaps in that set of processes for your organization. And as usual, once you've written them down and once you understand what's going on, it becomes an awful lot easier to see where those gaps are and to understand what needs to be done to fill them. So that is a very brief overview. As I say, it's only touching the surface. Anybody get any questions about that? Silence. Okay. So as usual, for each of these things, we have things that I'd like you to do. So for this particular one, we're not quite there yet because we haven't covered everything. But what I'm going to get you to do, and some of you who are sitting at your computer will already have seen the email that came through from me for this week's stuff. I want you to think about ITIL. I want you to think about COBIT. I also want you to think about some of the standards that are out there, ISO 20,000, ISO 31,000. Think about their similarities, their differences, how they incorporate governance and risk and continual improvement, and how that can then be applied to your case study, even if it's just as an overview to say this is the direction you should be heading. Because your case study, of course, is for a new organization, and it would be very difficult for any new organization to implement these things from day one. But it would be even worse if the organization didn't understand that these things existed and should be something that they were heading towards at some point in the future, so that things that they're setting up now should be usable in that landscape. Okay, if there are no questions, he says, pausing for effect. Okay, if there are no questions, let's take a 10-minute break and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes.
No worries, see you in 10.
You know, you think 10 minutes is long enough to go and make a cup of tea, but it isn't really. Who knew? Okay. Oh. A wee hole in the blinds there. Look as if I've been targeted. Anybody got any questions? Anything's occurred to you over the wee break there? Nope. Okay. In that case, we shall move on to the second of our short lectures today. And as we're talking about COBIT and ITIL, and we've just done COBIT, you'll be shocked and stunned to know that this one is about ITIL, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. So again, as with COBIT, what we're trying to do is better understand the relationship between the IT that we are putting in and the business that it's there for. What it doesn't do is talk about any specific pieces of technology. It doesn't talk about Windows or Mac or iPad. It doesn't talk about Oracle or SQL or Microsoft or IBM or any other specific piece of technology. It talks about how things work. How they're implemented is entirely different. And part of the reason that it does that is the background of ITIL. I mentioned earlier that it came from a UK government initiative. And the issue that they had was, in the early days of IT, the sorts of stuff that we're talking about, where we try to identify a business need, figure out how that would best be served, and then identify, procure, and implement that solution was not really how it was done way back when. I've mentioned before the issue that we have in the early days. What we had was a bunch of IT that did things that had never been done before. They could add up lots of numbers really fast and completely accurately, which means that rows and rows of people sitting there with desk calculators adding up sales figures was no longer required. So that was enough of an incentive to move over to these new things. But it wasn't enough of an incentive to try and figure out whether or not this was sustainable or whether they interacted with other systems, because for a lot of time there wasn't any other systems. So what would happen is someone would go out and buy some IT. In the same way, someone would go out and buy a Bic pen, and somebody else would go out and buy a Stabilo pen in a different department. It didn't really make any difference. At that time, they weren't talking to each other. Who cares what pen you use? Computers at that time were very similar. An awful lot more expensive, clearly. Much more capable. But they were there as a single tool to do a single job. But of course, if you buy lots of single tools to do a single job, what if in a big organization there's the same job, but you buy a different tool for it? What happens if one government department buys an IBM system to add up lots of numbers, and another one buys a DEC system, and another one buys an ICL system? Another one buys a Fujitsu system. You get the idea here. They're all the same tool. They're all just hammers. They're all just pens. They're doing the same job, but they come from different organizations. They run in different ways. Software runs in different ways. And it certainly can't be run on all the other computers. They run different operating systems with different standards, with different ways of having to be run, with different types of storage, different types of tape, different types of everything. So if you have all of these different types of system scattered all over the place, and you can think of it as the early version of some departments prefer Windows PCs, others prefer Macs. It's really difficult in an organization to properly support both of those types of system. Imagine what it was like in the early days when you had a dozen different types of system. How do you get better with all these different pieces of hardware, software, peripherals, all of these different things all kicking about? So once that happened, the government said, look, we're spending a lot of money here. We're not sure we're getting the right return that we should have had. Maybe we can do it better. What they come up with was the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It doesn't say what you have to have. It doesn't say, oh, we are stopping buying from DEC. You must only buy from IBM. So it's platform, technology, everything agnostic. All it says is you have to have some standards somewhere, and those things must include the standard that it works for the organization. So it started setting up things like this. Could you hear that? As well as my computer blue screening this morning, my monitor has been intermittently going black and making a lot of electronic interference, which you can hear through the speakers.
Thought you'd maybe switch back to the speakers for back in the day that could predict an incoming phone call.
Aye, that's what it sounds like. No, it's the monitor. And the monitor just keeps going black and then coming back on. I think 2 years have been on for 10 or 12 hours a day. It's had enough, basically. Okay, so for ITIL, what they come up with were things like this. The idea that we have opportunities here to implement IT because there's a demand for specific systems. But, not surprisingly, as with any organization, we want to ensure that we're getting value here. Now, that could be value for money, but it could be all sorts of value issues. Again, choose your metric. If we do that, if we go from the opportunity or the demand to the value, maybe there's some things in there that we should be doing to ensure that that works properly. And the first one of those is figure out what does give you value. Now, it could be that the value is don't change. We've got a system, it works. Leave it there. That might be the best value. Or it could be that value comes from implementing a new system that saves people's time. Or it could be that implementing a new system comes with a saving in terms of support contracts because a new system's cheaper. It doesn't specify what the value is. Again, it's agnostic in the same way as it is in other things. You need to figure out how you generate value and whether that's a direct, this saves me £10 per transaction, or indirect. This causes a lot less hassle for our staff. Which suggests that you need to figure out what you have already. What works, what doesn't. The cliche is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't just say, oh, I'm fed up with this, and dump everything. Try and understand where the good things are. And similarly, try and understand which bits are less good and could be improved. Big bang changes tend not to be particularly helpful. It's incredibly difficult to manage. Trying to change every system throughout an organisation at once is hugely problematic. And you'll remember that a few weeks ago I mentioned the bank who tried to do exactly that. They brought in a new system, tried to do it overnight, and chaos ensued. So rather than a big bang change, try and iterate. So we're back to PDCA. Get better. And then once you've got better, set a new target and get better to that target, and so on and so on. So we're back into these things all appearing again. It's important when you're doing these things to understand what people need, what they want, and what they were comfortable with. You have to collaborate. The idea that you would walk in to any organisation and replace a core system without properly consulting with your staff, without properly understanding how a system's used, without properly evaluating different ways that you could approach it. The idea of getting into an organisation and doing something that mind-bendingly stupid doesn't bear thinking about. You need to be transparent. You need to understand who's at stake and what's going on and what the changes that you intend making, what that will do to those people. And of course, it's not just about the change. It's not just about here is a new system. There's a whole bunch of other stuff around that. There's going to be training. There's going to be changes to hardware that might be required, or changes to outputs, changes to the way people work, changes to the way that systems interact. It's the whole system, which they call the service value system. And the service value system includes all of these things. The principles, your governance, the value chain, the practices, and the continual improvement. What's that? Governance, continual improvement, practices, which includes risk. All of this stuff's coming back. You need to ensure that the changes that you're making, keep it simple. And where you can, optimize. Why are you having systems that don't interact. Why would you, for example, store a set of figures in one system and then demand that your users print those out, take them to another system, and then re-enter them? I've seen systems where not only do users have to do that, they have to change the values. So that, for example, values are stored as numbers have to be changed to percentages to be entered into the new system. Not surprisingly, that creates a lot of issues. It creates a lot of errors, which would be fine if what the people were doing was what people do best. Understand, value, make decisions, but it's not. It's pure automated arithmetic work that you're making people do instead of the computer. It's just nonsense. So automate where you can. Only get people involved if you absolutely have to. So that's the guiding principles for this service value system. That's what we're trying to do. So that's this first one here. Let's look at the next one. Not surprisingly, governance. Is everybody on board? Not only are they on board, will they support this? Is this something that is key to the organization? Is it something that the governance of the organization agree with and will support? If you don't have that, your system is going nowhere. Another thing we want to have in this service value system is continual improvement. The PDCA that I spoke about weeks ago. And it's the same process. The same way of approaching it that we talked about before. What is it we want to do? Where are we now? How do we get from here to there? Here's how I think we do it. Let's do it. Did we get there? Yes or no? If we did, fantastic. What's our next action? And if we didn't, okay, what do we need to change? So it's the same kind of idea. Continual improvement in order to ensure that we continually get our processes better and therefore make the organization better. And we can only do that if the practices that we introduce into our organizations, the way people work, the way we approach things, if they are all there, consistent, and available. And again, there's another one of these where there's lots of different practices. 34 of them in ITIL. For general management, service management, and technical management. And again, I talked about COBIT having lots of processes. So you might want to look at both of these things and see the similarities and the differences. Now, I'm not going to cover all 34 different practices, nor am I going to read out this slide. But this gives you an idea of the different types of general management practice that you might want to look at when you're looking at systems. What is it that you want to do? If you're changing your firewall because you have cybersecurity issues, how does that fit into the architecture of the rest of your system? How does it fit into the portfolio of equipment that you already have? Is it more or less expensive? Do your staff understand it? So there are all of these things, including managing the risk. How do you make sure that you do this without putting at risk whatever? And of course, you have to decide what that whatever is. So You need to understand the risks of making changes. So there are all of these management practices that you need to take into account. There are service management practices that you need to take into account as well. Will your new firewall always be available? Will you be able to monitor it from wherever you need to monitor it, or do you have to go into the bowels of the building and look at it manually? If that's what you mean by monitoring, or by monitoring, will it create statistics to tell you things and show you how well it's worked and how many things it's stopped? Speaking of which, what will it do when those things happen? What about the event management? How is your service desk going to work with it and manage those incidents as they turn up? So all of these service things also need to be looked at and understood, and ensure that you have thought about them and have a plan in place for them. Not all of them for everything, but it should at least be in your thought processes, and that's why they're there. If you put in a new firewall, there may be no change to your service design, because as far as the end users are concerned, nothing's happened. And that's fine. Is there any change to your service design? No. Users won't know. But you've thought about that as being a possible issue, written it down that there's no change, everyone's happy. If it was a different type of system, if instead of the firewall you were changing the password rules, well, yeah, there's a service design issue. If you're going to go the way of lots of organizations and introduce two-factor authentication, do all your staff have the appropriate hardware? Do they all have an organizational phone, for example, in order to run an authenticator app? If not, are you expecting them to have their own device? Is it fair for them to have their own device and have to use that to log into the organization's systems? Never mind fair, is there a security issue there? So there are all of these things that you need to start thinking about, and all of these headings will help you do that. Similarly with technical management, it allows you to think about all the technical issues that you might have. If you're swapping out one firewall for the other, are there things that are going to happen when that change is made that will have knock-on effects to other systems? Do you have to replace them all at once if you have multiple firewalls for different systems? Do you have to deploy them simultaneously, or can you do a cascade deployment? I don't know, but I'd kind of like to ask the question before I do it. Anybody get any questions about that before we move on? Nope. Okay, so we've got this idea that we have an opportunity or a demand. We've got the idea that there has to be a value added for the organization, and we've got all these things that we want to look at: guiding principles, governance, practices, and continual improvement. And then in the middle, we've got this service value chain. So only once we have assured ourselves that we've got all of this in place do we even get to this middle bit. Only once we know that there's a demand, only once we know that it will provide value, only once we've gone through the guiding principles, the governance, the practices, and the continual improvement, it's only at that point, once we have done all that work, that we can look at the service value chain. And knew I was going to overshoot. So this is the middle part from that last diagram. So only once we've figured out all of the other stuff around it, that's the point where we can start to think, oh, so what can we do for this then? So we've got all of these other processes in there. We're still talking about demand and value on the outside, but this service value chain is what we can do once we have satisfied ourselves about all the other things. Only once we've done that can we plan our implementation, engage with people, and then finally we'll figure out what it is we're going to get, either by obtaining it, buying it from a third party, or building it ourselves. We then need to transition to that new product and support it. So this bit, the bit where we actually do it, is actually embedded in amongst all that other stuff, all those other things that we are doing beforehand. I'm trying to understand why my video is going so choppy. Is it choppy for you guys as well, or is it just on my screen?
I can't actually see you, so I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, the actual screen capture's been fine, but as for the video yourself, I don't know.
Am I not in front of the slide for you, no?
No.
That's the way it's supposed to be. It just keeps going choppy, and Task Manager's fine. I'm not doing anything too major. No spikes, nothing getting anywhere near 100%, nothing getting anywhere near 50%. Anyway, so all of this stuff, all of this internal stuff, internal to that other diagram, can only be done once we've done the outside stuff. So it's not about, oh, there's a product we want, and work your way back to figuring out how you get it in. It very much works the other way around. These aren't dramatic pauses. These are pauses because my computer's decided to not advance the slide. There we go. Now, when we talked about risk for governance, risk and compliance, we talked about ISO 31000 and how that was an international standard for risk. For IT service management, we also have an ISO standard, ISO 20000. Originally, it was based on ITIL, but like all of these things, it evolves, it changes, because life evolves and changes. So it was built on ITIL, and there's still an awful lot of ITIL in there, but it's also grabbed things from other standards, including COBIT, but weirdly also from manufacturers' standards. So there's something called the Microsoft Operations Framework, and that's how well, you can go and look that up later, but it's basically how Microsoft decide that systems are going to operate. But parts of that have been taken and put into a standard for doing things. Now, as I say, there's lots of parts. They're shown by using an oblique and then a number. And the stuff that we've just been talking about is 20,000/1, service management. And it talks about all of these things that we've just been talking about: the scope, the leadership, the evaluation, the improvement. So all of those things are in ISO 20,000. And again, I'm not going to pretend that this is an in-depth coverage of ISO 20,000. I just want you to be aware that it exists, to be aware of the links between all these different standards and how, when it comes down to it, they're all trying to do the same thing. Make sure that the organisation is well run, make sure that people understand the risks that are going on, and that the organisations continually try to get better. Anybody get any questions?
None that I can think of just now.
Okay. In that case, I have done with my lectures, and if no one has any questions, I will stop the recording.